All right, guys, I think we are live right now. How's everybody?
Hello. Good.
How are you doing?
Good.
Here from Barcelona.
Yeah, so right now, Loic, Gino, Alex, and myself are in Barcelona. And how about you, John?
I am in Santa Barbara, California.
Nice, nice. How are you, Gino? How's everything going?
Actually, it would be very interesting if people from the live stream, if they could share where are they from. I suspect.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
From
That'd be
Barcelona,
great.
but it would be interesting to know how many people we have from around the world for this live streaming. Oh, wow. We got already plenty of comments.
Yeah, there are plenty of comments.
It's not specifically about Barcelona, but I used to be incredibly obsessed with cycling. And so I had to go and visit Girona because it's like famous for cycling, but I didn't tell my partner that I was there for the cycling. And so we arrive and it's like this beautiful city and there's beautiful food. And then all the cyclists start to ride into the center of the town. And she looks at me like, you jerk. Like that was why, anyway, that's as close as I've been to Barcelona, to the airport to get to Girona, so.
Nice.
We have people from a lot of different places. I'm just reading a couple. So we have people from Porto, Barcelona, Belfast in Northern Ireland, Helsinki, Atlanta in the US, New York, Amsterdam, London, Buenos Aires. So yeah, we're pretty global today, I would say.
Welcome, everyone. Very happy to see faces from when we were still running the meetup in person. It's nice to see that so many people are still with us, despite we don't have beers and pizza at the end, which I suspect that has been always the motivation for many of them, but me included. But now we will have to, well, you know what, is bring your drinks. So I actually have my glass of wine. It's evening in Barcelona. I suspect that for John, it will be probably weird. It's probably breakfast time for you, right?
Yeah, I've got the coffee for now. That's good. But I'm jealous of the red wine, so I'll keep looking at it. That's good.
This is actually a placeholder for a physical meetup we should have at some point in time in Barcelona. So you can have the glass of wine in Barcelona, but also finally visit the city properly.
Here, Johan says that the fridge is not that far from yours.
Shall we start?
Yeah, let's start.
So I want to spend a few minutes on what is ProductTank. I think many of the people connecting today, they already know ProductTank, and maybe some of you specifically ProductTank Barcelona. But I always love to recall the story of ProductTank. This is something that started 10 years ago in London, where people, product managers, decided to get together and share their pains, because doing product can be lonely sometimes. And I personally experienced that. And it was one of the reasons why I decided with some other folks to start the Barcelona chapter. But back to 10 years ago, those people got together in London and they saw the value in get together every now and then, share experiences. And this eventually became a global organization. It's now 5 continents, more than 200 cities, more than 150,000 people around the globe attending ProductTank events around the world. And especially now that we are all transmitting live, you know what, these city barriers are kind of falling apart, and it's so nice to have people from all around Europe, the world, joining us for evenings like that. And said so, I will pass the baton to Guido to introduce our great speaker.
Hey there, how are you? I'm Guido Lonetti, like you can read there. And tonight we have a very special guest, probably one of those that don't require an introduction. Sean Cutler is a former PM of Zendesk Pendo.io at Keeper, and he's currently the head of product research and education at Amplitude. He's a product team coach, and he spoke in several conferences. And tonight we have the pleasure of having him at ProductTank Barcelona with his talk called Bets, Missions, Boards, and North Stars. Welcome, John. How are you?
Yeah, well, I'm great. Thank you so much for, I'm just going to laugh for 1 second, but I'm working where my kid plays. And so if we need to play any music, I have his piano. I just realized that it's right there. So if can see the video, you can see. I'm not going to start playing too, but if we get to get the drama, we can play. If you have a kid, you know what I mean. Like you learn where their toys are over there. Anyway, I'm extremely excited to be able to speak today, and for you inviting me. Obviously, it'd be nice to do these in person, but really the virtual thing does bring people from all over the world, and it's incredibly exciting to do these. I think Guido pretty much covered my background. In general, I have a background in product management and in UX research. A couple startups thrown in along the way, and I've got a bit of a late start to this. I spent most of my 20s playing music. I was involved in, playing in bands and traveling around. We didn't really make a lot of money, but we still got to travel, so that was good. And so I got started as a product manager maybe at 30 after that. So after 10 years of that. And I think what my goal is for the talk, I do have the title of the talk, the Bets, Boards, Missions, and North Stars, but I want to give you some context about my role at Amplitude, because this might help frame what I'm going to talk to you today. So at my role at Amplitude, I actually spend a lot of time talking to customers who are product teams, like cross-functional product teams, and designers and engineers and data scientists and analysts and marketers. And I also get to talk to people who are not customers yet, who are just the general people seeking advice. And one thing I've learned, first, number one, is that it's not easy anywhere. So I was speaking with someone, and they, I mentioned a company that I had met with their team. They said, "Oh my goodness, I read all their blog posts, and that's the most amazing place in the world, isn't it? Because they know everything." I was like, you know what? Their problems are pretty similar to your team's problems. They have good focus as a team, and they learn and they adapt as a team, but they have the same types of problems. And so when I was thinking about that pattern of those conversations, I also started to pay attention to some simple hacks that I used as a coach over and over and over again. And I started to do this so often that I thought, well, I should do a talk on this. I should talk about these things that I end up talking to these teams about over and over again that seem to be helpful in helping them nudge their organization forward. And in many cases, the things that I'm going to talk about today are specifically things that were kind of small tweaks. So I call them hacks for a reason, because these are not like earth-shattering changes in how teams work, but they're just small, slight hacks that can get organizations thinking in new ways. And most importantly, to have shared understanding and communication as a team. So I want to share those with you today, and leave a lot of time for questions if you have any. And hopefully some of these you can apply soon in your environment. But these, again, are the things that I've built up over chatting with all these teams that seem to have a good effect. And hopefully will have effect with your team. So to give you a summary of the hacks and the thinking models that I'm going to share today, we're going to talk about something called the messy middle, and I'll explain more what that means. We'll talk about the idea of framing things as bets. Some people are fans of Annie Duke's book called Thinking in Bets, and this is not by any means a new way of thinking about product work, but I've found this framing to actually be really valuable. We'll use this tool that I've used to describe ownership boundaries, which is one of the real areas for product teams. Who owns what, and who owns the problem and the solution, and there's all sorts of debates. And I've found that this tool helps have fewer debates and more productive conversations. We'll talk about hacking the language in general, which I think is like an easy way to get wins. We'll talk about designing a work taxonomy. So like, how do you think about your work? But then I'll get into the meat of it. I wrote this book called North Star Playbook, and I'll dig into that because I think it's a really powerful tool. And we'll end with that, and then end with some questions for that. So that's the summary, and I'll jump in. And I guess if at any time, for some reason, I lose connection and I'm talking off into the void, I will keep checking my phone occasionally to make sure Gino hasn't called me or sent me a text message if things have gone off the rails. So we'll do that. Okay, let's get started. So the first hack, the first thinking model I wanted to share is this idea of the messy middle. And this is if I was to name one problem that spins up again and again and again in talking with teams, it's this challenge of the messy middle. And let me explain the messy middle using a tool that I enjoy using a lot that is helpful to teams. So imagine your organization and imagine the work, quote unquote, work that's happening in your organization. And I like to use this system of ones and threes. So at this very moment in your organization, there's work happening that's going to take 1 to 3 hours. There's work happening that's going to take 1 to 3 days, 1 to 3 weeks, 1 to 3 months, 1 to 3 quarters, 1 to 3 years, and 1 to 3 decades. And this is all related. So when I say work that's going to take 1 to 3 quarters, maybe that's not work. Maybe it's a bet. Maybe it's a mission. Maybe it's a goal. Your 1 to 3 decade bets might be the things that your whole company exists on, that foundation. Now, you can probably guess where the messy middle is. It's in the middle. This range in the 1 to 3 quarter range, which often sits outside of quarterly planning and sits outside of, obviously people come to work, so they're going to find something to do for 1 to 3 hours. And they're probably going to know what they're going to be doing for the next 3 days. And in most companies, you generally kind of know what you're going to be working on for 1 to 3 weeks. But somewhere around the 1 to 3 month, 1 to 3 quarter range, it's like a black hole. And what I mean by that is if you're the CEO of a company, you've written your 1 to 3 year annual planning decks every day. You know those things. And some team has described what projects or OKR is going to do, so you know the 1 to 3 month thing. But 1 to 3 quarters is this area of work that is often not defined very well, and the bets are not very defined very well so that the organization understands what you're working on. And so clarifying this messy middle, clarifying what the shape of the work looks like in this 1 to 3 quarter range is extremely important. And I always like to say that the best teams I meet think big, work small. So they know how to work in the 1 to 3 hour, 1 to 3 day, 1 to 3 week range, but they think big as well. And by big here, I mean in the 1 to 3 quarter, 1 to 3 year, that kind of range. So the way that I test, I'm sort of sharing my secrets about how I do this, but the way that I test this in an organization when I'm going in and coaching them is I'll say something like, oh, hey, could you just go into Jira or whatever tool they're using? Can you just pick a ticket at random for me? Just anything. And they go and do it. And I was like, okay, great. Can you go from that ticket, that 1 to 3 hour task, all the way up to the 1 to 3 year company bets in more than 3 steps? Because if you do it in less than 3 steps, they'll say, I'm working on this YAML configuration file so that my company can change the automotive industry. Right? So that's less than 3 steps. That's not very helpful to me, right? What's helpful to me is something like this, like we're working on this ticket to that mission to help us do some higher level mission, which will help us some even higher level mission, which will help us some even higher level mission, and on and repeating. We don't want to just say we're working on the ticket to change something, because that's too few. So what would an example of this look like when someone has this figured out? And this is the test I'm basically doing, is it's not the engineer's fault. It's not the designer's fault if they can't do this. This is the product manager's responsibility. And if they can't do it, there is a problem. And often it's in the messy middle of the amount of work. So you could imagine an example here. I'd say we're working on Jira ticket ACT 1252 to predictively autofill transaction details, which will help us improve the efficiency of the bank reconciliation workflow, which will help us retain larger accounts with in-house bookkeepers, which will help us increase recurring revenue, and will help us market to larger prospects who we lost when they trialed the reconciliation workflow. So that's detailed. That's an answer when someone can do this experiment. Now, extra credit when I'm talking to teams is when they add in their assumptions, which we believe will help us improve the efficiency of the bank reconciliation workflow by some metric, by saving between 15 and 20 minutes to finish the process, because we know 80% of these things, or because we assume. So that's an even extra level of depth that we're looking for. So before we move on, I just want to describe kind of what I talked about there, is that the first hack that I use in these environments, and I can even go back to just make more sense of it, is to start with the work in an effort to go from that work and explore the causal relation, explore the mental model of the product manager into that 1 to 3/4 range. In this case, that might be retain larger accounts with in-house bookkeepers. Maybe that's the 1 to 3/4 thing. But I'm using that technique to get at the messy middle. And even more broadly, this messy middle problem, you really need to think about it as an organization, how you're describing that work at that level. Okay, so we have to know what the work means, and we can use these techniques, and you can, tomorrow, go and ask an engineer in your organization to go from the work they're working on, the 1 to 3 hour range, up to a 1 to 3 year company bet in more than 3 steps. And let's see how it works. You can get back to me on Twitter and ask me how it went. The second hack that I use is I've been very active about using this framing things as bets. And for some reason, I found this to be incredibly effective. And I think the reason is, I don't know if any of, maybe some of you have used lean startup with the idea of like hypothesis-driven development. Now, the funny thing is that I always remember a CEO saying, hey, when's the team going to stop experimenting and start working? Right? So there was this impression that, everyone loves to think that they're experimenting and loves to think that they're working very rigorously with a hypothesis and thing. But at the end of the day, that doesn't resonate with all people in the organization. So bets are very, very interesting, right? Because bets can be big, they can be small, they can be risky, they can be safe, they can be descriptive, prescriptive. We could have a big batch bet that there's no way to do it incrementally. There could also be an incremental friendly bet. There's some bets that are an upfront gamble. There's some bets that change the bet, that you can change the bet over time. There's some bets that are connected with other bets. So the reason why I like this framing of bets more than definitely project or initiative or anything like that is it really forces the team to think about risk and the shape of the work, to use that kind of Ryan Singer idea. And this is incredibly helpful when trying to understand, I always have the joke that someone, worked with a salesperson. They said, you just need to build this feature. And I was like, well, what's the bet? And they said, what do you mean, what's the bet? And I said, well, tell me, what do you think is going to happen? And they describe it really well. So there's the ability for people in non-product to understand this concept of the bet. Sorry, heard my phone and thought that I was offline and talking to no one. So the idea of framing in bets is very powerful. And, I give some examples here. I actually made a little tool that you can use, and I'll show you the link to that later. But often what I do is I'll sit down with a CEO, or I'll sit down with a head of product, and I'll say, could you just fill in some blanks here? And you would think that this would be a very easy exercise for those folks because they're talking about these bets all the time. But you can imagine, we believe that by focusing on some blank will make it possible for customers to achieve some blank more blankly, which we believe will benefit the business by something. This level of crispness and using these types of hacks to try to understand what the bets are for teams, it's a very useful method, because often we think we know what each other means. You see this a lot with founders and C-suite, where they've talked about the stuff so many times that they think they all agree, but they don't. And that's an important point here, that you have to, by thinking in terms of bets and sort of framing very crisply what these bets are, you can start to have conversations that your team was having trouble having before. So another facet of bets, I showed you this 1 hour, day, week, month, quarter, year, decade. In a way, these are all bets. I'm betting that this button is going to work this way, which is going to help me with this other bet in the 1 to 3 day range, which is helping me with this other bet in this 1 to 3 week range, and month range, and quarter range. Back to the messy middle problem and related to these things of bets, is the number one problem I see is just a lack of discipline in terms of describing the bet. It's very aspirational, like we're going to go up market, or land and expand, which is a way of talking about going into the enterprise and landing in an enterprise and then expanding. That tells me nothing. Land and expand is not a bet. What are the bets? What's the, we bet that we can land in companies XYZ and expand using ABC, which is going to let us do 1, 2, 3. That's the level of crispness that you're talking about. And by using this framing in terms of bets can be helpful. So I made this product. You can go to teamprompts.com and I made it, I think it was a year ago. But it has these fill in the blanks. But I think that the first thing, the actionable step that you can take here is look at your work in all of these ranges and really get crisp in terms of describing what the bet is. And then consider using this language of bets in your organization to try to engage people like from sales and marketing, other people who don't really want to talk about experiments and hypotheses. They want to talk about action, but by using the word bet as it relates to action, you do both at the same time. You acknowledge risk, and then at the same time, you acknowledge that you're going to be doing something about it. It's interesting. The next tool that I use that has been extremely helpful as we kind of lead up to the missions and the boards, which we'll do later, is exploring ownership boundaries. And this has been phenomenally successful if you find your company going in circles about who owns what. So it's actually a pretty basic thing, and I've used this maybe for 2 years now overall. But in this system, there's 3, 6, 9 levels of work. From build exactly this to a predetermined specification, that's A, to build something that does something with a behavior, to C, build something that lets a segment of customers do something, D, solve this more open-ended customer problem, E, explore the challenges of or improve for a segment, F is improve a metric, G is explore a new landscape, H is a generate a short-term business outcome, and I is a long-term business outcome. The beauty of this approach, and I don't know if you know in your organizations, I wish we could all like raise hands or whatever, but I always ask people, in the last month, have you had this debate of who owns problems and who owns solutions? Now, the irony of that question to me is that no company is that simple. To one group of engineers, C might seem like a problem to solve. To another group of engineers, C might seem like a solution. I've been doing product for a long time. So if someone comes to me and says, make us $5 million in a year, I'm nervous, but I'm really excited by that. Now, if you go to a junior product manager and say, make us $5 million in a year, they're not going to have a good day at that point. They're going to be a little bit nervous about what their boss is going to do. So by using these methods, you're able to have a much deeper discussion about the shape of the work. Like what is this bet? A D type bet, solve a more open-ended customer problem? Or is it a G type bet, which is explore this whole new problem? And coincidentally, if you're kind of paying attention to it, you realize that, again, all this work is happening at the same time. Most G level work involves A, most F involves B, most E involves C. So the hack here is to use this method. Now, what's really fascinating in doing all these conversations is how this relates to organizational design. And so this is something that's been extremely interesting as I talk to different companies. But I'll do an activity with a company and ask them to take a couple initiatives and tell me which level they were at, and were they a designer, engineer, or product. And you start to get diagrams that look like this. This is unfortunately, me trying to draw in Keynote, so it doesn't look like a very good diagram. But this is an organization, and you can see that PM is shifted to the EFG area, which is explore the challenges of, increase, decrease a metric, or explore. And you'll see that UX is slightly to the left, is a little bit more in the E category, or in the C category. And you can see that developers have this sort of section of work all the way over to the left. And so one thing that I find fascinating about this is that it can feel very abstract when you talk in your company about problems and solutions, etc. But using this method, you can have a very crisp discussion. Another thing that's interesting is power dynamics. Like some large enterprises or some very sort of hierarchical organizations have the team locked into a certain level, and the PM at a certain level, and the VP of product at a certain level, and the GM at a certain level. Whereas in other organizations, it's much more overlap. So that's very interesting. That's a very interesting thing to explore. So what can you do tomorrow? You could, well, I'm going to share the deck. You could go to a part of your company or a set of teams, and you could look at a random sample of work, 20 initiatives over the last year, and you could describe which level they actually fit on, and also which roles were involved in which parts of that. So that's something you could do tomorrow that will help you have this conversation, which I think is good. So I'm sharing this list with you again, but I'll share the deck with you afterwards, so it's good. The fourth thing is to hack the language. And this is one thing I say to almost any product manager who feels that they're working in a feature factory and feels like they, people don't trust them to create outcomes, and it's just build, 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 ship, ship, ship. Often, I discuss bets, so that's a very good example for this, but often little things like changing from the word project to the word mission, or changing from the word done to decision point. We're not done, we've hit a decision point. That just reminds me too, it was a couple months ago, I asked someone, how's it going? They say, it's going great because we get to work longer on our work instead of shorter. So what they meant is that they were being so successful that it was okay for them to work longer instead of being asked to ship so quickly. And so you can imagine that done could be a decision point to continue working. Instead of debt, which is a really debt's always someone's fault. It's always like product, you made us run too fast, and therefore engineering accumulated debt. And it sounds like debt that someone's got a blamey type language, right? And so I prefer drag in that case, because whatever it is, doesn't matter whose fault it was, but there's something creating drag on our ability to create value. So just by these kind of subtle shifts in language, you can get things. And the example I gave before was, the person said, well, when's the project going to be done, John? I was like, well, the mission's going to be done then. No, I said, when's the project going to be done? I was like, well, the mission's going to be done then. Oh, okay, all right, it's a mission. 1 month later, why do you call them missions? Well, projects have a fixed beginning, middle, and end, and they're a certain scope, but a mission in product is something that lets us create outcomes. It's a way that you can assign a team to a mission that's more than just shipping by a certain date. So you can see how the language can be powerful. So the hack for you tomorrow is make a catalog of the words you use in your company and pick a couple good candidates to try some subtle changes. Maybe you're a big project place, maybe try to change those to initiative or mission. Maybe you're big on problem and solution, maybe you change it to opportunities. That's a really good one. Instead of problem solution, talk about opportunities and interventions. Because not all problems are worth solving. Not all problems are an opportunity for the company. So just that subtle language can be really effective. The fifth thing, and I'll go pretty quickly through this to leave a lot of time for questions. And this is, I would say 80% of teams, 90% of teams have this particular problem, that they don't even really know how to talk about their work without treating all work the same way. They don't have what's called a taxonomy, so a way to kind of describe differences between things and categorize things. And this is fascinating to me in that sense, because they work so hard, to write their product requirements documents and the things like that, but they just don't have a clear way to talk about work. So with this, the way that I work on this is I actually ask a team, what must you eventually know about this work to make good decisions at the right cadence? So what do we need to know about the work to be able to make good decisions? Now, notice I didn't say you have to fill in 50 blanks before I'm going to give you budget. That's not what this is about. What this is about is trying to think about, what does your team need to know to decide how it's going to work on something? And so, sometimes I do exercises like this where I have a very simple scale of complexity and size, and then I ask them to place, 20 efforts they've worked on this chart, and we decide, some work feels really big but not too complex, and sometimes, so there's ways that you can pick away at this using diagramming. From there, you can categorize work. You can say, well, we actually have, 6 shapes of work at the moment, A, B, C, D, E, and F, commonly used in the company. And this is how we approach it now. And these are ideas to improve it. I think what will amaze some people is I've never gone to a company and had them come up with fewer than 6 or 8 shapes of work, different types of work that you would work on in different ways. So as a product manager, the really important point here is that describing work all the same way will not help the people around you try to figure out how they're going to align the resources and their skills around it. This is actually from an exercise. And so this company would have efforts called things like tags V1. Hey, it's in Jira, it's there, it's called tags V1. Tags V1 tells us nothing about the work. It tells us nothing. On the right here, you see all the questions that this team wanted to know about the work so that it could work effectively, ranging from the assumptions and the beliefs and the learning goals and the risks and the technology used and the org visibility to the size of the effort. So I'm trying to point out here that what we often see in companies is that we either see these very rigid requirements documents or these incredible shorthand, tags V1. And what we really need is to think about the nuances with the work that we're doing, and then try to make sure that we don't need to answer all these questions on the right, but we need to be able to address them at some point to be able to make good decisions. So whenever I talk about this section, people say, okay, we're going to have the magic one-pager. We're going to have a magic product requirements document. Everyone's going to fill it out, and then everything's going to be great. And I would urge you instead to consider coming up with some groupings of the types of work you work on in your company as a valuable way to make decisions about how you're going to work on it. I call this, another thing I do with teams is called design a one-pager. So often people, Google one-pager format product. And then what they do is they come back with this, incredible one-pager format from someone else. And I tend to suggest that you come up with your own format. How would you treat this as a design activity? What should one-pagers look like in your company instead of copying everyone else's things? And then you could go from there. So I'll just briefly jump into the North Star framework, which I think is the final kind of hack that I work on with this that I really enjoy. And then we'll jump into some questions about these various hacks and how to do this. So North Star framework is a very sort of simple, there's nothing incredibly new about this. These types of driver trees and things have been around for a long time. But the idea with the North Star framework is that you pick a North Star metric, which is a leading indicator of mid to long-term value, sustainable product-led growth. And then you pick a series of inputs that act as inputs into that North Star. The vital thing to understand here is that these are not point-in-time goals. These are not OKRs. These are not, this model stays the same as long as your strategy stays the same. And that is extremely powerful in organizations. Because what I see with all these sort of quarterly planning, quarterly OKRs is that right now everyone's in annual planning and we're stressing out like crazy. We're pulling our hair up and we're going to come up with the most beautiful vision and strategy by the end of the year. And 6 months later, no one will even remember it. And everyone will be in this horse race every quarter. What's my quarterly goal? Why am I doing this? Oh, I can't do this thing. And so by coming up with something like this that lasts as long as your strategy lasts, you're able to plug into it. And let me show you what I mean. I can give you Amplitude's example because I think this is a good one so you get what we're talking about here. So at Amplitude, our North Star is weekly learning users. And weekly learning users are people who are active in our product, but not just active. They also are people who share learning with their coworkers, and that learning is consumed by their coworkers. So I always say there's the dashboard graveyard. Does no company how many companies have 1,000 dashboards sitting in a system and no one ever looks at them? So the idea of the weekly learning user is we don't want that. We want someone to create content that other people on their team will share and consume. And we have 3 inputs. We have to activate the accounts. We have to help them broadcast their learnings, and we have to help those other people consume the learnings. I don't even want you to get into the details of the metric here, because the important part is this reads as almost a shorthand of our strategy or a shorthand of our focus at Amplitude. At Amplitude, we focus on helping users learn and share that learning. And it's a function of our ability to onboard those accounts and make them successful initially, and then help people create content, and then that content being consumed. So notice I didn't need to add the metrics for this to make sense. This is just our particular strategy. So one thing, I wrote a book about this called the North Star Framework. You can Google it and get it from Amplitude, but it's one of the big projects in my life. I like doing that. It's not a long book, but it still was really hard. Books are hard, as I learned this year in a big way. But you can run a North Star workshop to try to establish something like this in your company. And I would say that's the #1 hack. Like something, it doesn't matter if you use North Star Framework, but something that captures this level of simplicity that doesn't change and isn't always kind of running through the quarterly meat grinder is a good thing. So whenever I mention that, someone says, well, okay, well, John, I get what you're saying, but where do you put those OKRs? Where do you put those things? And that's actually pretty easy. So now I'm going to bring it all together. We talked about bets. We talked about this North Star thing. So if you imagine your North Star is leading indicator of mid to long-term value for your company, and you've got a series of inputs, what I call level 2 bets, or these 1 to 3 month bets, target these inputs, right? So in the case of Amplitude, we might have an initiative that targets activated accounts at the top. And then OKRs become easy. OKRs are just the forecasted impact of the level 2 bet on the input. And this is a huge bonus for teams. I always joke with people that OKRs should be easy. And they look at me and they say, well, oh my God, they're so hard. We worry about them. It's a quarter is 91 business days. We spend 60 work days, and we spend the last 10 days pulling our hair out, trying to figure out what our OKRs are. And I said, well, what's your strategy? Oh, we talked about it last year in the beginning of the year. Strategy is to land and expand. I was like, is that useful to you? No, it tells me nothing. It tells me nothing about product. So by focusing on this kind of North Star, you're able to get people things like OKRs or point in time goals. We're going to move, Amplitude will move our activated accounts from this point to this point by the end of the quarter, become really easy. So that is the next sort of step. You map the work to the inputs. And then the final thing, which I love, and then we'll jump into some questions, is visualizing work is probably one of the most powerful things any team can do. And I'm sad about the shift to remote, because I don't think any of the tools, I don't know, maybe Miro or Mural has the potential to do this, but very few of the tools have the ability to practice the character, to get the character you want from these visualizations. So just going back, this is a theoretical visualization of what we just had. We've got the North Star framework on the left. We've got this board, and you can see we have our 1 to 3 year bets and 3 to 9 month bets, and our quarterly bets, and you've got the yellow work. So this should be a pretty common visualization. We prioritize level 2 bets, and teams focus on them, and we review them. Notice the hacking of the language. Instead of saying to do, doing, and done, I say to focus on, focusing, and review, or to try, trying, and review. That's a subtle hack of the change of language, because nothing's done in product. You're never done. No one's product I know is done, even if they say that it's been sunset. There's always work happening on it. You're never done. Now, you're probably looking at this and you say, well, okay, John, this is theoretical. But it's not theoretical. This is a company's board. This is a big visual board. It's 25 feet long. And it has everything that we've just spoken about. It has the North Star and the 1 to 3 year bets up there in the upper left. It has the inputs, are these horizontal rows. It has the focusing area over there on the right. And it has the trying area over there even further to the right. And it has the review all the way on the right. So everything we just spoke about is right here. What's fascinating, actually, if I had shown you this picture and said, how much of this board is people typing on keyboards? I wonder how many people would have realized that the only part of this board about people typing on keyboards is where it says trying. That's the world of product. There's way more work in our minds than what amounts to people, quote unquote, working and typing on things. So visualizing work is an incredibly powerful thing that you can do. These are these actual goals, you know, so they've got these rows, they've got their inputs there. So I don't think this advice, I want you to think about this from the virtual perspective. I say, get out the tape, get out the magnets, but you can see how this board has so much character and has so much flexibility for the different shapes of work and different styles of tickets. There's a reason why this board was so successful in the company, and there's no way you're going to get this board in Jira. There's full stop. There's no way you're going to get it. So think creatively about how you're going to try to do work visualization as we do it. And with that, you can go and see this board. You can go and see a copy of the board if you want to see it at this URL. So I'll stop sharing now and jump to questions. Hopefully that was interesting to people to hear about the hacks that I use like week in, week out for teams. And I think I go back. Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. Hi. Wow, that was super interesting. I think I took screenshots like almost of every slide. That was really, really interesting. Yeah, as a reminder, please put your questions in the chat on YouTube. I'm trying to ask as many as we can get in the next couple of minutes. I would start with one that I personally am really interested in, and Gino on the other side as well, is like, you showed the range from A to I questions that some on the scale on where who's owning the product, who's owning the problems, who's owning the solutions.
Yeah.
We would be super interested in like how do you see the mid-level or yourself as the head of product in kind of shaping that and making sure that it's kind of balanced between coming from C-level top down, or everything is coming from the teams. Like, how do you see the position of a head of product or director in that sense?
Well, yeah, and so I think I showed that one slide where I showed in the very hierarchical organization, you know, the VP of product owned a particular item. It might have even been, you know, right near the end. It was like H or I or G, you know, they're going to own that. That's their thing. They're going to own the strategy that they're going to set that, right? And then in other organizations, you see much more flexibility on the part of the teams. Remember, I showed this model of where you have like a general manager type model with a lead product manager, but the overlap between them and the teams was not all that great. You know, there was a lot of overlap regarding that. And so I think it's too difficult to answer because it's like highly contextual. The one thing I would say is, though, just having this conversation I've observed has helped leaders of product figure out where they need to be focusing. You know, like you think that this is completely easy, but just having that conversation about like you're a director of product, you know, I need you focusing on this level, but I don't want you owning it. Your responsibility is to share enough context with your product managers that they can then own what you own. So the idea that each of those rows is owned by one person and that's the end is not correct. It's fluid in many cases. So like, you know, a head of product might really do some deep strategy work, and they are going to hand over that understanding to someone else to do that. So hopefully that's clear. We could go deep into it, but yeah, so much to say about the levels. It's just fascinating seeing teams work through them in many cases.
No, that's totally interesting. We do have something similar in my company, but the board is kind of solely for our segment, which is 4 teams. So it kind of misses everything that is happening on the left and the right. Plus, I think in the current situation, everyone working remote, it's kind of hard to kind of facilitate that board.
Yeah.
There was one question from Ricardo where he says, like, with the global shift to remote, if you have a tip or if you have an idea how you could set up that board in a virtual kind of way.
I mean, the things like Miro and the sort of agnostic board systems, I mean, it can be Miro, give the ability to link to tickets. I mean, one thing that's interesting is I always play this game is if a board has 1,000 tickets on it and they're moving every day, you're never going to be able to have a physical board because it's going to drive someone completely insane, right? So the challenge with a virtual board is you don't want too few things that never move, because that won't be interesting to someone. And you can't have so many things that move every day, otherwise that's going to drive people insane. But when you start to think about even that company that I showed you, maybe 70 or 80 things total, like, and that was for everything, you know, from the stuff all the way upstream, all the way, there wasn't that many things on it. So my point is, I think that like Miro, Mural, etc., are perfect when you're not modeling the 1 to 3 day, 1 to 3 week work. When you stick your board to your 1 to 3 month and 1 to 3 quarter type missions, if you can come up with a good vocabulary, you're never going to have so much on the board that makes it hard to use a visual tool, a virtual tool to do it. So I'd say the first step is to pick the right level for your company and make sure you don't have 1,000 things on there, and then you'll be in better shape to be able to use a virtual tool to do it.
But in the end, it comes probably to like how many people are participating. Like you need probably the whole product organization to be aligned, right?
That's this problem. The problem with the messy middle work is that no one comes into work worrying about it. So the thing I've realized is that like people come into work worrying about their OKR or the story that's assigned to them in the sprint or whatever. And the CEO has been walking around with a deck to all the investors for the last year, so they care about the one page in the deck. But no one is going to pat you on the shoulder for the messy middle work. That's the thing this is one thing I've learned a lot about product work is you have to decide on the handful of things that you need to keep doing that make no sense. And what I mean by no sense is no short-term sense.
Yeah.
You know, and a classic one is annual planning. Oh my God, it's so painful, so we only do it once a year. There's nothing stopping a team from doing a more continuous planning approach. It's just they think that the short-term hit is too much. Like, oh my goodness, we're going to be so slowed down. But they don't see that if they build that habit, then everything becomes easier. They're much more efficient and much more effective. So I think every product team needs to decide the couple of things that are irrational that they're going to commit to do as experiments for a couple months to see if they work. And frankly, updating a physical board on even virtual board in the 1 to 3 quarter mission range is no one's going to pat you on the back every day for that. So you have to decide what you want to do.
Yeah, I totally understand that. There's a question which fits quite well into this. Mark is asking, like, it seems that there is a lot to do with, or it's super important that the teams are aligned to kind of run with a strategy for a couple of months. And he would be interested in like what the percentages of time that you put in to get to this alignment with conversation or thinking and thinking versus producing in the end. Like if you could give us a bit of an example.
Yeah, this is a super interesting thing because I think this is also about perception of time. So I'll use the annual planning example. The way that annual planning works in a lot of companies is there are some team events, but most of it is this kind of one-to-one dance. Like, hey, here's my strategy. What do you think? Oh, I don't know. Okay, let me do it again. Oh, let me show this other person. This is a strategy. So you stretch this kind of planning exercise through all this kind of like process again and again and again. And then if you ask that team, hey, can you just take 4 days offsite to do the strategy? They'd be like, no. Totally inefficient. Everyone needs to keep typing. Otherwise, we're not going to hit the end of the goal. And you're like, you've burned through 50% of everyone's time for the last 2 months on planning exercise. So don't talk to me about 4 days. Like it really would not ruin you to spend 4 days on it, right? And so I'm using that example to describe the lineups for these 1 to 3 quarter things. What I've noticed with a lot of product teams is they're so busy that they try to do the 20 hours of work necessary in 30-minute meetings. So they have 40 meetings and then design is off trying to research something and, oh, can you take a look at that? And, oh, I'm on this. And you sort of create this, you saw that board, how little of the work was the typing work, right?
Yeah.
And so the reason why I'm mentioning this is that, you could line up a 1 to 3 quarter mission in like 2 good days of activities to really narrow it down. So 24 hours, 16 hours multiplied by the number of people in the room to do it. And everyone would think it's the biggest waste of time. But if you worked that way, you could then like keep your head in the game about what you're doing. So it's not so much about the total time. It's about how you do the multitasking, I think.
just trying to play it back what I understood. So you would carve out some time, bring in the responsible people or the people necessary to build the product strategy, and then over a cadence of a couple of months or weeks, kind of redo this exercise and see where you stand towards.
Yeah, and right. And I think that when you're going to do it, get the right people. This whole idea of like one-on-ones and then other one-on-ones and 3-person meetings, then 5, then 6, whatever. If 10 people are involved, get a good facilitator and get 10 people in a room and figure it out, even if the first meeting seems crazy. And I think that that's a big error that a lot of teams make, is they shy away from that type of work in this kind of very meticulous sort of one-to-one thing.
Yeah, no, super interesting. We do have some people in the audience that are more on the PM level, probably head of product level. They are more interested in like how, like, do you have any tips or insights for us on how they could start with this tomorrow, even if their company doesn't provide the long-term goals, long-term OKRs? Like, are there any quick fixes that they can do to kind of change their perception?
The number one fix is call the kettle black. And so what I mean is that your strategy is your strategy right now. Somewhere in someone's mind is why you're doing that, even if they're telling you to ship this feature. And so there's nothing stopping anyone on any product team from talking to the right people to form a map about what they're doing. And I even say this to teams using North Star. Someone said, we work in a feature factory, we can't use the North Star framework. And I said, yeah, it kind of sucks that you're working like that. But what is the North Star? Just because you work, a great example, you know, to the levels of work, there are some organizations that teams to just ship XYZ. And then someone from the organization tries to see if there was an outcome. They don't let the team iterate on the thing. It's some other part of the organization decides whether it was working or not. So one of the big secrets here is to decouple in your mind how you're structured in your working agreements from what the strategy action, like what the strategy is. You might be working in a feature factory, but that doesn't stop you tomorrow going from every single JIRA ticket and trying to trace it up to a 1 to 3 year company bet. And if no one gives you an answer, put a big question mark. You know, so that in itself is progress, if you can figure that out. And then worry about later why you're not given the autonomy to do X, Y, and Z. The learning from me is that work in the 1 to 3 hour to 1 to 3 decade range is happening all the time, anytime, even if you think it's not happening. It's just either in someone's head or it's someone who's not you. It's the CEO who said, go build this. Well, they are playing at a certain level. You're playing at the ABC level. There's still a strategy there, if that makes sense.
No, that's super helpful. And I hope a lot of our listeners are going to change it tomorrow. It's totally tough.
No one's going to, you don't need permission to do that for it. That's my point.
No, that's a really good answer. And I totally agree with that. You touched a couple of times the North Star framework, the North Star workshop. We do have a couple of people interested in who do you think should be present at that North Star workshop? Like, what are the disciplines? Who are the people that you need to kind of build a proper North Star? So
there's, I'll do this one really quickly because I have to answer this question a lot. But the first thing I look at is there a strategy or not? Yes or no? Is the strategy halfway reasonable? Yes or no? Like, is it just crazy or is it semi-reasonable? Yes or no? Is the strategy explicit or implicit in the company? Meaning, is it communicated? And fourth, is the company structured to execute on the strategy? The reason why this is related to the North Star workshop is sometimes you find a company that has a pretty good strategy. It's just been kind of implicit, like they've never really talked about it. There's a lot of subject matter experts, like people in UX and support, who understand the customer experience. And then what you want to do then is you want to get a nice diversity of people in that meeting because you already know it, you just haven't talked about it. The dangerous North Star workshops is when there's no strategy, or it's a terrible strategy, or the structure of the company is not set up for the strategy. Because then what you have to do is you have to think carefully. Maybe it's better to do it with a small group first and then at least get, a chief product officer understanding what's happening, because you don't want to go to the CPO and say, oh, by the way, we just did a 2-hour activity and have come up with a better strategy than your strategy. So that's a little threatening. So basically in the former, bring anyone who has insights into the customer value exchange or the marketplace or like diversity is good. And you just need to get what's out of people's head. The latter version where there's a missing strategy or a really bad structure strategy fit, you need to be a little bit more. What I mean by structure strategy fit is that what if you do a North Star workshop and the company is literally not structured to have teams focus on inputs? They can't do it. They've got dependencies. They've got 3 designers with 150 engineers or something crazy like that. So in those models, you need to be pretty sensitive before going crazy with the North Star thing.
Yeah, that's true. No, super interesting. I hope that answered your question. So the next one we do have is something a bit more from the technical side, but I think that could be quite interesting to a lot of people here. Cream, and I hope I pronounced that name correctly. He's asking if you have seen good examples on how to push architectural or technical enhancements as kind of input metrics with a North Star, and what the best practices are.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I love talking about this. Is awesome. I'm so happy that we spoke about this. So remember, the North Star should represent our current thinking. And so the interesting thing with that is that, I don't know if you noticed it in the example, I had a health metrics input. And I didn't talk about it, but there was a fourth one called a health metrics input. And what's really interesting to me right now is if you said to any company, if you said to Amplitude, just go after those inputs like crazy, everything will work out, right? Don't worry about architecture, just bring a lot of debt into the company, we'd be crazy. There's no way that we would be able to function like that. There's a lot of architectural work. There's a lot of work necessary to keep the value creation system working. And so what I like to do is I hate these 2 roadmap problems, the architectural roadmap and then the product customer facing roadmap. What you want to do is, if you're a product manager and you have architects in your team advocating to work down the debt, is you need to say, look, I worked at a company that went from shipping things in 10 to 30 days to 100 to 300 days. Nothing product could have worked on would be anywhere near the most important thing to work on. The most important thing to work on was literally the debt. You could have asked people to stop working and it would have been faster if you just let people focus on the debt. So the whole point there, back to what I said about debt and drag, you want to have one thing related to health, and these architectural things which are meant to speed the value creation in the long term, keep the oil in the system, like water the garden, weed the garden, keep it growing. You want to give those a first-class input in the North Star. And I really like using that approach. So then all the architectural projects, you could use the Accelerate DevOps metrics or there's other health metrics that you could use, but you could figure out something for that health indicator and then have those architectural efforts either attached to the work directly meant for the inputs or directly attached to that health indicator, set of health indicators.
But still, there's kind of a balance next to the other input indicators. So not saying, okay, we're doing 100% architectural work now for the next step. Yeah, no, that's super interesting. I got a question from David, which I actually had myself on my notes, which I would be super interested in. Is you talked about the messy middle a lot, and he's asking if product should own it, or if there are also other disciplines within the company that definitely should own the messy middle, or at least a part of it.
I mean, I think product should own it, but this is not just it's going to be collaborative. Almost by its definition, the messy middle work is going to be relevant to investors, is going to be related to, the CEO, sales is going to care about it. Everyone's going to care about it. So I think that what product owns is making sure that the messy middle is translated. in a way that's both relevant to the business, the quote unquote business, and relevant as a product strategy decision. That's the problem. There's plenty of people come up with messy middles that have product doesn't even know where to start. I don't know what to do with that. Yeah. And there's plenty of other ones that only product knows what it means. And the rest of the organization is like, I don't know what about that. So I think product owns defining those messy middle 1 to 3/4 bets in a way that are understandable and recognizable. And if you get the North Star right, that really taps into a lot of those bets anyway. So I think that product definitely owns it in terms of acting as like the connective glue there is helpful.
Yeah, nice. Looking at the time, I would ask one more question. I could go on for hours because it's super interesting, but we're like over an hour now. So one last question I do have. And it's about the change of language. I found this very, very interesting, like doing similar things, but saying or calling them differently, like has a huge impact, I could imagine. And I did some stuff myself there already. But maybe you could give us a bit of insight, like what could be indicators in the change of the behavior of stakeholders that you would say, okay, after changing language, it goes now in the right direction or in a better direction?
It just happened at Amplitude, actually. So my education team, you know, people started like, you're going to work on these learning projects. I'm like, no, we're going to work in 6-week missions. That's what we're going to do. I mean, I've used 6-week things for almost 10 years now, right? So it's a really nice period of time. It's not too short. It's not too long. It's just about right. It's in that 1 to 3 month range.
Model, right?
Yeah, it's like I mean, this also predates shape up. Ironically, sprints used to be 6 weeks, and now they're 2 weeks or 1 week. So people just got a lot faster, right? So, but I think that related to that, you know, I started saying that, and then suddenly someone from customer success is like, wow, it seems really interesting that you work like that. Could you schedule? I'd like to schedule a meeting with you to learn about how you work. And I did it. So that's how you know it's working, when people come to you very curious about what is that thing that you're talking about. That's usually a good sign in general when people do that. If it's not working, no one will talk to you about it. You'll know very quickly that no one cares.
Cool. I think we're at the end. I would bring back the other guys to the stage. Sure. So that we can do a wrap up. That was super, super interesting. Thanks so much for your time, and thanks for the talk.
I can share the deck with you immediately afterwards, so that way people can see awesome. The individual things.
So let's see where they are, so we can close off.
There we
go. Hi, Guido, Luke. Cool. I think that is it for the version of ProductTank Barcelona this time. Yeah, if you want to get in contact with Amplitude, please use the email address which you see on the bottom here. Again, thanks so much, John. And I hope you all have a very nice evening or morning. John is in the US. So thanks again for tuning in, and see you hopefully soon.
My pleasure. That was a lot of fun. Thank you so much. Ouch. Yeah, bye. It's like my ears just.
See you all. Cheers.
Yeah, see you. Sorry about that. The sound is just